Hey, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the Global Trade Tech Summit. My name's Greg Miller. I'm Senior Editor with American Shipper and FreightWaves. Joined today by Annelise McCarthy, Head of Client Engagement with Pangeeva, a division of S&P Global Market Intelligence. Hey, Annelise. Welcome. Glad to be here.
Hey, Greg. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about sourcing post-COVID or probably mid-COVID because we're still in the middle of it. But first, why don't you tell me a bit about Pangeeva, a little bit about its history and what kind of data that it provides?
Sure. So Pangeeva is the global supply chain product of S&P Global Market Intelligence. And really what we do is provide insight on global trade trends and companies' supply chains. And we do that by taking a lot of data, over 1 billion records. These are shipping manifests, import-export data. We combine that, we clean that, and then we organize it for our customers. And our customers are global companies, primarily sourcing professionals, logistics companies, and manufacturers as well.
I can't think of a year that kind of data has been more important. It's been a crazy year. You're looking at it from the trade data perspective. We've been looking at it from the container shipping perspective, and it's just been an incredible roller coaster. February, March, the Wuhan shut down. The container ships leaving China empty. That cargo was delayed. Came to the U.S. in April. Then late March and April, the U.S. shippers basically canceled all their orders because of the lockdowns. So that was, whereas the first was a supply side shock, the second was a demand side shock. And what the container lines did then was they blanked their sailings, or they canceled their sailings. And they basically canceled about 10 to 15% of the sailings in May and June. And surprise, surprise, there was more demand than they thought. The cargo got rolled or delayed to the next sailing, and then they put all that capacity back in starting in July in the third quarter. And we have record rates now, so demand is booming. So that's what we're seeing on the container side. How does that jive with what you're seeing on the trade data side?
Yeah, so really that perfectly mimics what we're seeing on the trade data side. Pretty similar hit on Chinese exports that occurred in February, March, when things first started to shut down in Wuhan, really spreading out, not just becoming a China supply side problem, but starting to impact India, Japan, the European Union, some of those taking effect a little bit later on in April and May. And then to your point, it wasn't just about supply anymore. It started to become a demand problem as businesses stopped investing, as consumer behavior started to change. So that was also driving down imports on the U.S. side of particular products. And to your point, we do see a bit of an uptick. I think just in August, we saw record imports coming in through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach as well.
And it's interesting. It's not, everyone thought the demand, everyone predicted the demand would just decline as a result of this crisis. But what happened was, at least in the U.S., the demand for products changed. So, certain importers did well and certain importers did poorly. And I think your data also looks at the various sectors and how they're affected.
Yeah, so I would say that most sectors felt some sort of negative impact, especially early on in this. We do see declines in imports on things like industrials, materials, energy, consumer discretionary. The two sectors that really weathered the storm from the beginning were consumer staples and healthcare, which makes sense. This was, hospitals, governments coming to us and urgently trying to bring in more PPE, bring in ventilators, and then individuals, stockpiling what they could on the staples side.
Right. And then I guess the question now is what do companies do next? And I believe Pangeeva has put together a survey to get to the root of that question. And tell us a little bit about the survey, and then we can go through those questions and the answers that you found.
Of course. So, in addition to looking at the actual import export data, we always like to go to our clients and really understand the types of decisions that they are making to give some color to the numbers. And so, the survey we put together just closed up pretty recently. We got almost 70 respondents. Global companies, these are, again, supply chain professionals in the logistics, in the importer, and in the manufacturing space primarily. And got some really good insight into how they've been affected and also what they're planning to do about it.
Sure. Well, let's start with the first question and what answer you found.
Yeah, so one of the questions we asked was pretty basic, just have you been impacted and what was the intensity of that impact? And to no surprise, over 90% of respondents said that there was some sort of impact on their global supply chain decisions due to COVID-19. But a lot of them did say it was a slight impact as opposed to being a heavy impact. The heavy impact was a little bit higher for the logistics segment specifically.
I wonder if the slight impact was because, I would think that in the midst of a crisis where you're focusing on the day-to-day, it's hard to change, it's hard to make major changes in your supply chain right now. I mean, you may think about it. You may think that would be a good idea, but, this is a tough time to do it. So perhaps, the slight change now is simply because, they're more focused on the here and now. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that could definitely be part of the factor there. I do also think a lot of them said they were able to put a plan in place fairly quickly, despite the impact to their businesses, which is really great to see. And I think reflected in some of the answers they gave around what sorts of changes they're putting into effect.
Sure. All right. So what was the next question?
Yeah, so we asked people what was the impact. We talked about the supply side, we talked about the demand side. So no surprise, we actually see the customers saying that they had impact on both of those as well. On the supply side, it was really around getting product to market, having some sort of delay in their shipping, delay in product being created because of factory closures. So that was one type of impact that they experienced, especially on the retailer and import side. And then on the demand side, they started to see less demand for their products. Certainly logistics companies came to us about that. They weren't looking for new customers early on in this. We had them coming to us and saying, we're just here to defend our current clients. This isn't a moment for expansion. Certainly that might have changed since early days of COVID. But another way that companies have been dealing with that decreased demand is also changing their product mix and thinking more strategically about which products to bring to market in these times.
Okay. Yeah, that change in product mix is important. You saw a lot of companies that were doing one thing suddenly switch over to something else. Whether it would be, masks or what have you.
Yeah, we work with a handful of apparel companies, and this is something that we're hearing from them. Certainly, they were hit pretty hard with COVID-19 and people staying home and frankly not buying as much, not as much apparel. And so moving into that mask space has been a key strategy for a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be a kind of company that can move quickly to do something like that. What's next?
Yeah, so I think a question that's been on our mind is how long do we anticipate something like this to last? And, I don't think anyone has a hard and fast answer to that. But when we took that to our customers, we heard back from them that most are anticipating impacts from COVID-19 on their supply chains to persist into 2021. So the issues that they've been experiencing both on the supply and the demand side. And then on top of that, they're actually interested in keeping the changes and strategies they've put in place to deal with COVID-19 into the future.
Huh. I mean, that's an important point because people have been talking about making changes for years and years, and we heard it also, of course, in the last several years with the tariff issue. People were saying that, they're going to change the way they do things. They're going to change their sourcing strategies. Maybe they're going to do more regionalized. Maybe they're going to go to other countries in Southeast Asia. Maybe they're going to bring some things domestic. But there's always this inertia that keeps them from changing. Change costs money, and so maybe it's something like this is the impetus that will finally make them change after all these years when they've really sort of kept the same. I mean, if you look at where a lot of the cargo is coming in from now, it's China. So.
Agreed. I remember having a conversation with one of our large retail customers. This was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And they were telling us about this strategy of trying to move out of China, to your point. And we're talking about moving from 90% of product coming from China to 80% of product coming from China. And they had a 5 to 10 year time horizon. So, these aren't easy changes that companies are trying to make. It takes time, it takes investment.
Right. And then your survey also looked into the kind of changes that they were interested in making.
Yeah. So the one that I just mentioned about changing which vendors you're working with or which geographies you're sourcing from was one of the top strategies that companies are using, certainly to deal with concentration of risk. So when we talk to customers about trying to move their supply chains, it's often because they want to mitigate risk. They want to have more opportunity and option. So when things get disrupted, they have a fallback plan.
Right. And, this is interesting for the container shipping industry. They have, the container shipping industry has built these massive ships, with 15, 18, 20,000, 20-foot equivalent unit capacities. And basically, they've designed the fleets to go from one giant hub, essentially in Asia, to one giant hub, essentially in Europe. So they're building these giant ships on the basis that trade is going to be, relatively uniform and very, very, very long haul. And one of the things people are worried about, and which may come to pass, and which coronavirus may accelerate, is this idea of regionalization or bringing supply chains closer in. And then what are they going to do with all these big ships? What they really need is medium-sized ships and small feeder ships. So we'll see what happens. But it's interesting that if all these changes are made, the container industry itself may have the wrong fleet. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think the thing that really shined through in the survey is the companies that are able to understand those trends and what's going on and make the changes are the ones that are able to kind of weather storms like what we've seen. I don't think anyone could have really predicted COVID-19, so it comes down to having an agile approach.
Exactly. And then, beyond the survey, you also put together some data on the outlook as well, I think, right?
Yeah, so something that we get asked about a lot is, what's to come? What are we going to see as far as imports and exports? What's the sentiment? So certainly we can't always predict what will happen, but sentiment does seem to be rising and improving. I think the clients that we're working with are more optimistic as we go into the latter half of the year. And certainly with the holiday import swing coming in, we're seeing a rise in imports coming in, not necessarily to 2019 levels. I don't expect that we'll see that, but certainly better month on month growth than we might have predicted earlier on in this.
Yeah, we're looking at the numbers right now in terms of the customs filings, and the question we have is, there does seem to be quite a volume, and it's very specifically coming across the Pacific into California, which is the fast way to get things into the United States. So what we're wondering is how much of this is cargo that essentially was inventories that were used up in the previous months and needs to be refilled. How much of this is importers basically bringing cargo forward that they would have normally imported in September or October, and they're bringing it forward till now? And how much of this is really incremental demand? I mean, so that's what people are trying to figure out, because they are seeing an unusually high level of activity.
Agreed. And I think we're seeing something similar on our end.
And there's also this idea that the retailers in the United States, they have a lot of closed stores out there, and the storefronts aren't working for them, so they're all looking to sell online. I mean, of course, they're going to be competing with Amazon there, but you got to do something. So if you're going to switch from a store to online, it's possible that you may be bringing in inventories to facilitate that new strategy. So maybe that's something we're seeing there. We're not sure. But something seems to be happening. It just seems more, if we thought a couple months ago and looked to where we are now, it just seems like things are more positive than we had thought.
Agreed. We had done a bit of a shorter survey in July just around that question of when we anticipate, or when our clients anticipate things to go, quote, back to normal. And it was less optimistic than what we saw in our most recent survey. So I agree. I think the clients are a little bit more optimistic as we go into the fourth quarter.
Yeah. And then I think you've also done some data on the China aspect as well, with in terms of the cargo specifically coming in from China to the United States.
Yeah. So to your earlier point about trying to move supply chains and what does that really look like, we dug in on what does import value from China look like over the years. Is it actually changing? Is it growing? Is it decreasing? And really, it has been increasing year over year until really 2019. And probably due to a lot of the tariff situation that took effect, then we start to finally see them lose a little market share relative to where they had been.
Yeah. I just think it's an ironic point, that this virus started back in February in Wuhan, and all of us were looking at what was going on in China and thinking, that their economy is going to fall apart. And this was a big worry for shipping because all of shipping is essentially leveraged to what's happening in China. And then, fast forward to now, and we see Chinese factories very, very busy, working away, putting out products, and putting them on ships to come to the United States for U.S. businesses and retailers. And meanwhile, the U.S. economy itself is in a bit of limbo. So, things have turned around here. It's ironic that China seems to be doing so well at this point as a result of U.S. demand. Who would have thought?
Yeah, and I think we're now in this stage of kind of staggered reopening. Different markets are taking different approaches. They're in the different timeline as far as recovery. And it does create a bit of a tension, right, between China, which is open and producing product, and maybe the U.S. market, which still hasn't fully recovered.
So I guess if we were to sum up, how would you sum up everything that we've talked about in terms of, where we are in terms of, the imports, the exports, how things have gone according to plan, what companies are doing, how they're reacting? What's the summation of all this?
Yeah, so I would say the thing to take away is we're still very much in the midst of this, and the impacts that we've seen from COVID-19, both on the supply side, the demand side, now on this staggered reopening phase that we're in, these are really issues that are impacting all companies, all markets, and the companies that are going to do the best are the ones that are able to take a look at that bigger picture and plan ahead and make some real changes to their supply chains now that they can use moving forward. And I think data is really the key way to do that.
Absolutely. So basically, there's been a huge impact. It's not quite as bad, at least yet, as people had thought. And it could precipitate change. So we could be dealing with the after effects of this for years if supply chains and if global sourcing is changed as a result of this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to talk today, Annelise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. It was great to be here.